Just days after the governor of Missouri signed a draconian near-total abortion ban, that state is now on the verge of becoming the first state in the entire country without a single abortion clinic. That's because, according to Planned Parenthood, the state's health department is threatening not to renew that organization's license to offer abortions in St. Louis, which is the only place in Missouri that provides the procedure. Their license expires on Friday. We've seen a wave of states passing incredibly restrictive abortion bans recently, including Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Kentucky, and others. But in a sort of pincer move, states are also and have been making it much harder year by year for the clinics to operate. For one example, in 2008, Missouri had 5 abortion clinics. Now the state is down to 1, and soon that number might be 0. On a national level, the Supreme Court today upheld part of an Indiana law regulating the disposal of fetal remains. And while the court sidestepped the Indiana law's strict abortion ban, perhaps the most revelatory aspect of their decision was a 20-page concurrence by Justice Clarence Thomas, a full-on polemic invoking eugenics with regard not just to abortion, but birth control as well. Here with me now, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who once again today called for Congress to pass a Women's Health Protection Act to protect abortion access, and Melissa Murray, a professor at New York University School of Law and the co-editor, along with my wife Kate Shaw, of a new book, Reproductive Rights and Justice Stories. Let me start with you, Melissa, because this Clarence Thomas concurrence is a strange document. It has no legal force because it's sort of about things adjacent to what they ruled on today. But what is he saying, and what is it signaling about where he wants the court to go?
So, one, it's an invitation to the larger court to take up this question of what he calls eugenics abortion. So laws that would prohibit abortions in situations where people want to terminate because of sex, race, or a fetal abnormality or disability. And to be clear, I don't know that there are a lot of abortions that are being done because someone doesn't like the sex of their prospective child, or someone doesn't like doesn't like the race of their child. I mean, it's mostly fetal abnormalities in situations where the fetus will not survive for very long after birth, and that's when it's invoked. But he's laying out a trail of breadcrumbs for the court and for the larger culture, again, to sort of take this up as a eugenics claim. And he's really pitching this as a racial justice wedge issue. So he invokes the history of eugenics and contraception, and there's a very lively history of eugenics and contraception, and he talks about it. Margaret Sanger, who
super racist.
But what he leaves out, and it's a really incomplete history, and I would love to get him in class to talk to him about this, but he is leaving out the fact that abortion restrictions are themselves born of this eugenics movement. So in the 19th century, the interest in criminalizing abortion was born of an interest and concern that native-born white women were using abortion and contraception to curb their fertility, while immigrant women were having too many children. So again,
both sides of the history are tainted by the.
So this is not a pro-life or a pro-choice argument. Everyone's used this.
All right. So we have the Supreme Court sort of, it seems to me, kind of opening the door to Thomas particularly. There's a few votes that want to, I think, just take the run at Roe. Or if not that, with these sort of incremental questions, which may be easier to decide for their side. Then you have states passing these restrictions. What do you view as the federal government's role in all of this in terms of the legislating branches?
What the federal government must do is to prevent all of these restrictions, not just the draconian and demagogic laws, the fetal heartbeat laws of Alabama and Georgia and Kentucky, but the restrictions in Missouri, for example, on licensing requirements, width of hallways and clinics, admitting privileges. I introduced the Women's Health Protection Act in 2013. I reintroduced it last week for the 4th time with strong support from NARAL and the Center for Reproductive Rights and Planned Parenthood, who are part of a movement that is trying to stop these restrictions.
Well, here's what's interesting to me. Democrats have generally not done this, right? So the way they viewed this is that you have Roe, and you have to preserve Roe and as much of Roe sort of in its full capaciousness as possible in the courts and in their state legislatures. What you're saying is essentially, and Kamala Harris today came out with a policy that would be kind of like a voting rights act for choice and abortion rights. You're saying is the federal government actually should pass a law and sign into law protections for people's right to access abortions.
These states, all of them, are playing a very dangerous game of legal chicken, in effect daring the United States Supreme Court to overrule Roe v. Wade, which some of the justices clearly do not want to address. But what the federal government ought to be doing, and Kamala Harris's proposal is very much the Women's Health Protection Act, which she has co-sponsored with me and Tammy Baldwin, another leader, is that there would be this pre-clearance process by the Department of Justice. I'm fine with that concept, but keep in mind, this Department of Justice is likely to clear a lot of those restrictions.
Here's my question to you, right? Is like, is there a universe in which you have a court that's willing to throw out Roe, which would be one of the most astonishing reversals in recent memory for the court, right? But then would like not throw out whatever Democrats came up with in a federal legislative context?
No, I mean, this is
right. Wouldn't they just scrap that too?
But this goes back to the fetal remains law. Like, what are they doing? Like, they're upholding this fetal remains law while sidestepping the question of the larger issue of Roe's viability. The fetal remains law, as it goes into effect, has real concerns for access for women. This is a law that actually adds to the cost of abortion in Indiana.
Right.
And clinics either have the option of passing the cost on to their patients or alternatively absorbing it themselves, which may drive many of them out of business. And that's the point.
Okay, I was trying to get clarity on this law today. So it's fetal remains not just for abortions, but also miscarriages. Is that correct?
I believe it's also miscarriages. But again, the language, and Justice Thomas talks about it too, is again to elevate the idea of the fetus to that of a human, which takes the question of the undue burden off the table because we're not talking about women anymore. We're talking about another separate human.
Do you view these? I mean, it seems like we're headed towards an explosive conflict. Like, basically, this cannot hold. The agenda for the court is clear. Mitch McConnell today saying, oh, yeah, if we had an opening in 2020, screw whatever precedent I said about 2016, like, we confirm it. Like, is that where you see all this going?
We're heading toward a very explosive moment. I think that's the right way to view it. And right now, the danger and the damage will be enduring because a lot of women feel that this right is criminalized. A lot of those women in those states where, in fact, criminal penalties have been imposed on the providers feel, maybe wrongly, that it's also imposed on them. And that fear and that intimidation is part of the playbook.
It's a great point that the publicity around the law has an effect over and above what the actual law is, or even if the court stays it. Like, people have been watching news reports about, you know, oh, you can get 99 years or things like that.
And when one more point, Chris, which is very, very important, the providers, the nurses, the docs, the clinic escorts, all also are subject to this fear and intimidation. And I have worked with them, and they really are profiles in courage.
Senator Richard Blumenthal and Melissa Murray, thank you both.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.